theater at its best is always, you know, a mirror. It's a reflection of who we are, and young or old, you can look at the characters in this play and identify with them, disagree with them, realize you have maybe some of the same prejudices, be appalled at some of the prejudices you witness, but basically it's a reflection of who we are, and that's what the theater is about.
It does. Yeah, I agree, and it holds a mirror up to our humanity, our shared humanity, but also in the case of this play, our shared identity as citizens of this very system that the play talks about. I think one of the reasons it's an interesting play for young people is it chips away a little bit at the cynicism and or even indifference that a lot of young people feel towards the system because they feel jaded about it, or it's, you know, which is very much a part of that passage of life. But the idea that it can actually be made to work and make a difference, and that one can be engaged in caring about it, is, I think, really a good thing for young people to feel.
Very valuable.
Because it's so easy to go, it's a system, forget it, you can't, but, you know. And this play is a very idealistic play about the fact that you can't, the system is just made up of people keeping it going one way or another. So you've got to get in there and do what you can to make sure it goes in the right direction. Also, it's a play about the fact that the majority can be wrong.
Yes. And the power of one voice.
Which is an interesting thing for young people, I think.
Sure.
The idea that, you know, the pressure of 11 voices saying this is the way it is, and one voice going, maybe not. I think it's I mean, that's salutary for anybody, but I think it's a good, I think that's a good thing for young people to hear.
If you care to look closely at the evidence.
That's right. You know, if you want to take the time and do the work to look at the situation.
So I was at an elementary school a couple of weeks ago.
All right.
And talking to children, and in that innocent way, they asked, "What is a playwright?" And I found myself having to define for a 6-year-old what a playwright was, and that was a big challenge to me.
I imagine.
So I'm curious, if you had to answer that same question, what would you say?
Well, I think it's a fascinating question. I've been talking recently to the ACTF playwrights here at the ACTF Intensive, and I've been trying to differentiate for them what a playwright does and what a playwright is from what, say, someone who writes for television is, or someone who writes for film, other dramatic writers. And really, I think it has to do with the expectations of the audience in both cases. If you watch TV, you're watching in your home, you're sitting in your relaxa lounger, you've got your drink in your hand, you have your remote, you watch as much of any one thing as you wish, and you're utterly relaxed. Even going to a film, you're relatively relaxed. You know, nobody cares. You know, nobody's watching to see when you come in or go out. It's easy to go to the bathroom if you want. You know, you're just kind of wandering in and out, and you don't feel all that connected to the rest of the film audience. But if you go and see a play, comparatively, you're under a great deal of stress. You're leaving your home, you're driving into town, you're spending a lot of money on parking, on the restaurant. You're worried about making the curtain. Because you feel much more connected to the rest of the audience. You feel much more in public when you watch a play, sort of inevitably. And also because theater seats are tight, you're closer to them, I think. And you feel as though you're in a crowd with, I mean, everyone else has the flu, and you know, there are all these intriguing aspects of stress. And you know, after the show, they'll be saying, what did you think of it? So you're worried that you'll be tested as a critic as well. And because of that, I think audiences for theater are under much more stress, and their standards are therefore higher. If you're going to keep them for 2 hours, they're going to expect more. They're going to want to be thrilled. They're going to want to be fascinated. They're going to want to be compelled by the material. So I really think that when you're writing, especially a serious play, but even a comedy, what you experience is an audience who has high standards, and those standards rise every minute of the show. You know, they expect the show not to be rangy, not to be digressive, to grab them and hold them all the way through. And the way you do that is you compel them. You know, you make them deal with something inside themselves. You make them judge themselves, and do that in a public context. So basically, I think a playwright, as opposed to some of these other kinds of artists and writers, is a person who first and foremost has to compel people.
Can you talk a little bit about the role that your plays had in the end of apartheid?
Well, I won't talk about the role of my play specifically because that invites me to be a little, I don't. I'll talk about theatre.
Lovely.
And I was
That's
part
good.
of theatre. I have no doubt whatsoever, as I sit here talking to you, Betty, that the reason for the extraordinary, miraculous, peaceful change in my society was in some measure due to the presence of a theatre in South Africa that spoke out bravely, courageously, and with no self-censoring against the evils of that system and of what it saw happening around us as we lived through those years. The South African Board of Censors, which was their official title, was a very, very real presence in my life, and a presence which I, as a writer, had to wrestle with continuously, because plays of mine did go on to be banned and taken out of school library shelves and heaven alone knows what. And most dangerous of all, sometimes when I was alone in the privacy of my study, writing a play, making me pause on occasions and say to myself, don't put that thought down, you will jeopardize the play. Now that is terrible. When you start censoring yourself, you're up against the greatest danger a writer can face. And I think successfully I overcame that moment, that pause, and I always saw to it that I went on to put down the thought that I was nervous about. But I lived with that for all of my writing life. It is my firm conviction that in any community, no matter what they call themselves, democracy or whether they're a repressive society, theatre fulfills a civilizing function.
There's a sort of fundamental truth about theatre, I suppose, that a good play should represent itself to every individual watching it, and you should, in the best of all possible worlds, you should be able to take from a play its truths as they apply to you, whether it be Shakespeare or whatever. The thing about this play that I always find and have found working on it over the years is that there's something so essentially pure about each moment in the play that it can apply with great simplicity to anybody if they listen to it. As Walt was saying, that Beckett said himself, it's all in the words. If you read it, if you actually listen to it, it will, anybody coming to this play, it's almost like a sort of theatrical process of confession. Come to it with an open, pure heart, or in this sense, an open and pure imagination, and it will embrace you, because whatever is in your experience, you will find within the play. It's quite magic. Before we began the program, Johnny and I were talking about this. I mean, one of the notions that sort of came out in discussion when we were rehearsing this time, the notion that at the time Beckett wrote the play, that Europe was littered with refugees. People who were displaced, had no home, no identity, nowhere to go, and were simply waiting for something. I'm not saying Beckett wrote the play about that. What I'm saying is that fits into what Beckett wrote, because he wrote about everything. By making it so simple, it fits every scenario. But Johnny was making the point that there's a scene where in the second act, Lucky and Pozzo come on, they fall over, they're lying on the floor. And for nearly 10 minutes, Pozzo is just simply saying, help. And the two of them debate it. They debate helping. And it's terribly funny. But then if you think of something like 10, 12 years ago, Rwanda, or anywhere in the world where genocide or hunger, Darfur at the moment, where there are people dying and are saying help, and the United Nations and the Western governments and the governments of the East debate how will we help them, should we help them, if we help them, would it be correct to help them in this way or in that way, but spend all this time talking about helping and not doing it. And while that's happening, the poor people on the ground are still saying, help. Now, I don't believe Beckett actually I don't think any man could realize that what he was writing was so universally, absolutely true. I think had he set out to write a play that was universally, absolutely true, he never would have written it. I think he wrote something with a degree of inspiration about human nature and the human condition, that the world fits into the play, not that the play fits into the world.
Since you started writing, has how we tell those stories changed in the theater, and who we're telling them to? Has that changed? And what they're willing to listen to, has that changed?
Well, I think that's all changed. It's like, you know, and when people could ride on the train, it changed how they felt about horses. You know, and when people had horses, it changed how they felt about walking. You know what I mean? There are different pleasures to the different forms of storytelling. And I think that what you need to do as a storyteller is to decide which of the many forms you have to choose from is the one that you need for this particular story. And I think that that's the crucial thing. I mean, there are some times when you just want to be on the train. You know, you want a long, quiet, peaceful, and there's sometimes when you'd like to be on a horse, right? Do you know what I mean? That's deciding which is the best form for the content that you have is the crucial thing about being a storyteller. You can't go and tell a kind of peaceful pastoral tale on the stage now because we want to read that a chapter at a time at night before we go to bed. What we want in the theater now is what only the theater can do, which is, you know, a story that takes advantage of the conventions of the theater, that uses the tricks, the smoke, the mirrors. You know, you want the magic act, which you have to see to believe. You know, I think that there's something about the liveness of the theater that isn't. Nobody else competes with us for that. You know, the movies, we know it's in the can. You can come see it tomorrow, it'll be the same. Television, you know, that's its own kind of wonder, right? And so are books of photographs, and so are books of short stories. But the theater is something that requires an audience to be there before it can happen. And when it happens, you don't know how it will turn out. It could be that tonight is the night that the actor falls off the stage. Do you know what I mean? That's part of what is thrilling about the theater. I think our challenge as storytellers for the theater is to use the tools that only we can use, and use those to the best of our ability. Don't try to do what TV does. Don't try to do, you know, what anybody else can do. Just do our tricks. You know, you don't want to see a great trapeze artist walking the balance beam. You want to see him on the trapeze. You want to see him fly, right? And I think that's the sort of idea about the modern world of the theater. There are lots of ways to tell stories now. Blogs, I mean, endless phone calls, right? Endless ways to tell stories, cartoons, you know. But what can we do that only we can do? I mean, I feel like so far nobody's figured out how to do musicals except the theater. And I think there are some other kinds of storytelling that are best done in the theater. I think that the theater is a wonderful place to tell stories about one person up against it. And I think that that's one of our strengths. You know, when you tell the story about, okay, here's Hamlet. He has a problem. He has to avenge the death of his father, and to do that, he will kill everybody on the stage. But that's Hamlet, right? And so that works best in the theater when you see that one person, and you in the darkness of the theater can respond as if you were Hamlet, right? To that story of that person on that path. And I think it's harder to do in film, although they do it. I mean, but we can focus in the theater in the way that the other forms can't. And we have in the theater keep going back to the liveness. We have this vibrations that go out from human bodies. Do you know, you sit there and film, and your eyes may water, but very rarely do you feel it here on your chest, you know, about what's coming to you from an actor, what's coming from a singer. When you're in a piece of wonderful theater, your whole body responds to what's on the stage. And I think that that's a thing that we know how to make that. We're doing that on purpose to get to you. But that's our treasure.
You're not as angry or as mad as other writers that were growing up in your time were, like I could say James Baldwin or Marie Baraka. And I appreciate that sentimentality that you have towards your work. And even when you speak, Why is that? Because you kind of had the same environment and background as them, but your view is totally different.
Well, here again, I came into manhood during the middle of Black Power movement and became involved in that various organizations in Pittsburgh. National Involvement of Africans was the Kawaida organization. I embraced that. I was briefly in the Nation of Islam. I embraced that, and then I thought, you could, in terms of, if you go back to the plays of the 60s, so-called angry plays, you could stand up, and we did all kinds of things. I know because I had a theater troupe, and we directed some of them, and we put white people on stage, we put them on trial, we murdered them, we did all kinds of things on stage. And I thought, the stronger political act is to present black life on stage, the tradition, in order to show not only that we have a culture, not only do we have a culture as Black America, but it is capable of sustaining us so that when we leave our Father's house, that we are fully clothed in manners and a way of life. And if I can do that, then that's a political act. It's a stronger political act than putting white people on stage and killing them, you see. So that's what I wanted to do as an artist, was to turn in and look at ourselves and present that, because so many, the society tries to deny that it exists. And I go, no, you can't deny, you got to look at this. Here it is, it's right here in front of you. And, the fact that my mother would be thrilled with the idea that the content of her life, can be turned into art, and can be turned into art that could, stand, on any level, world-class art, the content of her life. I think she would be, because she didn't know that, she died not without knowing that, you see. So I think she would just be delighted. So I think for me, that was the stronger political act, was to do that, But here again, I'm still the same person that in 1969 was involved in putting on those plays, was running around the following Baraka wherever he went, in terms of what he was doing. I think the idea of self-respect, self-determination, self-defense, which are the three tenets that that I still think that's valid, is crucial to Black American life. All three of them, and people with self-defense. Yeah, we're under assault. I recognize that. So I still embrace all of that. In terms of my art, I come at a slightly different, and yet I would hope equally as powerful view of it, viewpoint, or attack, a different strategy.
The question is, to see two people at the top of their game, I still would like to ask you what your feelings are about your chosen, about your choice. And also, this is the second part from Ms. Turner, what do you tell students now, when they come to you for counseling? Thank you.
I tell you, my family was not very avid about going into this profession. In fact, no one in my family had ever been involved with the arts in any way. So they were rightly quite skeptical. I have, once my mother said to me that she just thought I was very selfish. And I said, why? She said, well, my older sister is taking her degree in urban sociology and city planning, and she'll be working for the betterment of the community. My older brother is taking his degree in psychology, and he'll be helping people. My younger brother is taking his degree in computer administration and working for the GAO, the General Accounting Office. She said, what are you? How can you compare to... I said, if I'm as good as I believe I am, I will touch more people in this world and in this life than they ever will. And I hope that one of the reasons for acting, one of the reasons, is the extraordinary communication that you set up between people. When you sit in a theater, be it a movie or a stage, better in a stage, you're sitting closer to a complete stranger than you would ever sit in your own living room. And you start to breathe together, you laugh together, you hold your breath together. When you finish that show, you haven't just seen a show, you've been part of something and formed a commonality among the people you share that experience with. It's greater than the individual. I think this is I think this is so valuable that I would die for it. Huh? I really do.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.